Does anyone out there have a question before I keep going on? Ooh, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Lady Rocket. I am a CEO and financier of a new generation of media companies, which in particular are also dedicated to using entertainment as a rocket to help our space industry get more attention because we are foundering and NASA is running out of money and we need to get back to the moon, all of us equally. My question is, and thank you, Dean Hunt, for your presentation. However, there is an element missing where the power is concentrated. The element where all the power, all the decisions are coming from, which is diversity in funding sources. Who is financing it? And I have a front row view because I'm one of those people. And I can assure you that until something happened that I am doing, which means creating my own sources of funding. As a minority, as an immigrant, as a woman, as a producer, entrepreneur, I have to find my own powerful, big sources of funding. Big, I'm scaling up the size of the money that minorities have to go for. So I know that you had only gave us a preview of your research. I'm very curious if you looked under the hood and looked at the diversity of the funding sources.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. So when I was working for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that was one of the questions: who's responsible? And in fact, the reason they were asking that question, because believe it or not, there was actually a conversation at one point about, you know, to what degree can regulations or policies be put in place, you know, to regulate this industry to a degree. I mean, if you think about it, you know, going back to the airwaves and the role that the FCC played when the airwaves were understood to be publicly owned. Well, we won't talk about the FCC's role currently, but that basic idea meant that this was a public good, that there was a real social impact in media. And I won't go into all the media theory around why it's important, but let's just note that many societies around the world, the media is a highly regulated public good because of the known impact of media. So when the Commission on Civil Rights took a look at this issue, one of the questions they had was, well, who can we hold responsible? And they more or less struck out in trying to answer that question because it was almost like the buck kept getting passed. You know, the network said, well, it's the production companies. The production companies said it's networks. Someone else said it was a talent agency. Someone else said it was, you know, and so, you know, financiers obviously play a role because, you know, the funding for these projects is key. But at least in terms of film, you know, production companies are set up for one project, and often they'll dissolve after that project's done, and then what happens, you know? So that was the issue. And so at the end of the day, I think what they came back to was looking at the public fronts for these projects, the networks and the studios. And so that's more, and without respect to the finance, even though we know that that plays a role, someone has to be held responsible. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the funding is a huge part of this, but at the end of the day, if we're going to figure out how to track what's happening or not happening, it needs to be done in a way that people who are at least publicly owning, you know, these projects are ultimately held responsible for.
Erica, did you want to say anything about funding, about finding funding for projects and how easy or difficult that is?
Sure. There are large sources of funding out there. I can only speak from the perspective of a woman of color who has seen the likes of people like the LeBron James, or people who have like things like that, or companies that are able to sort of bring about large amounts of money. If you are from an underrepresented group, sometimes you have to get a lot more creative if you don't want to go through the established system. And you know, there are reasons why there are, I can't remember what it's called, but like I think it's SUSU. So there are ways that people are able to sort of, in their own communities, develop funds. It's not necessarily enough for specific projects. And marginalized or underrepresented minorities start to sort of come up, they can then, establish their own banks and things like that you can pull money from to do creative endeavors. But it lags behind because there's systemic racism that has kept, large groups of people from establishing large amounts of wealth necessary to do it.
Mhm.
Other questions?